July 26, 1944. 3 miles south of St. Lo, France, Staff Sergeant Frank Novak stood beside his Sherman tank, looking at a briefing that felt like someone handed him a slow, sure death order. The numbers were harsh and clear. A German Tiger could smash his Sherman from far away, more than a mile, but the 75mm gun on Novak's tank had to get close, around 300 yards, about 3 whole football fields, just to maybe mark the Tiger's thick front armor. In only 2 days, one Tiger had taken out 11 Allied tanks and 11 brave crews and 55 good men. American training said move together, stay in a line, focus fire, follow the handbook. But Novak had helped build these Shermans back in busy Detroit, and he understood what they could really do. And that night, while he drew simple angle shapes in his small notebook, he noticed something the handbook writers never even imagined. Not a stronger gun, not heavier armor, but a shape trick, a geometry idea that could flip 5-to-1 odds into something the German army never expected. The Tiger's strongest skill was about to turn into its worst weakness. Before we go forward, make sure to tap subscribe for more hidden stories where the old history books hide the details that matter the most. And leave a comment saying where you are watching from, because I enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. July 24, 1944, 0600 hours. The staging area 3 miles south of St. Lo smelled like diesel smoke and soaked dirt. The morning air felt cool enough that Frank Novak's breath made tiny white clouds as he leaned against the thick side of his Sherman M4A1. The tank name Lucky Strike was painted in white across the long 75mm gun barrel, a small joke from his loader about how good or bad their chances were. Frank did not feel lucky. He felt worn out. He had been trying to write the same letter to Rose for 20 long minutes, crossing out lines and starting again. The right words would not come. How do you tell your wife that after 3 weeks in Normandy, the hardest part was not the fighting, but the waiting? They had hit German half-tracks 2 times and took out a Panzer IV last week by the hedge, and the Sherman worked just like the makers promised, strong, fast, and good enough. "We have them outnumbered," he wrote at last, because it was true, and because Rose needed to feel he would come home. Near him, his crew moved through their morning routine. Jamie Walsh cleaned the gun breech with the same slow, careful touch he used back in Iowa, wiping every surface like he was getting ready for a quiet, simple Sunday inspection. Instead of another day filled with danger, Jamie hummed something soft under his breath, probably a church hymn. Jamie always hummed hymns when he felt nervous. "Sarge, you think we will see action today?" Jamie asked without lifting his eyes from his work. Frank folded the letter and placed it into his chest pocket, next to the last one Rose had written. "Intel says the Germans are pulling back. Might be a calm day." It was not going to be a calm day. Frank could feel it in the way Captain Morrison had been walking back and forth inside the command tent since dawn, and in the way the radio talk had gone strangely quiet for the last hour. Something heavy was coming. At 0700, Battalion S2 called the tank commanders for a fast briefing. Frank walked across the muddy field with 11 other sergeants and lieutenants, men who had learned to read each other's faces better than spoken words. Nobody felt like joking this morning. Captain Morrison stood beside a big mat board, his face gray and worn out from long days. He had fought in North Africa and had seen what German tanks could do when they had good, solid ground and stronger guns. When he spoke, his voice had the tired, flat sound of a man giving news he wished he never had to say. "Gentlemen, we have confirmed a Tiger 1 moving in the hedges near Hill 192. Call sign is Iron Ghost. Intel says it is led by Oberleutnant Carl Brandt, who has 47 confirmed kills since Tunisia. In the last 48 hours, this single tank has destroyed 11 Allied vehicles. 3 of them were Shermans." The tent fell quiet except for the soft start of rain tapping the canvas roof. Morrison pulled down a technical chart showing side-by-side drawings of the M4 Sherman and the Tiger. Frank had seen these long ago back in Detroit when they trained new crews fresh from the factory line. But seeing them here, in a field just 3 miles from where that Tiger waited, made the numbers feel colder. The M4's 75mm gun can break through 68mm of armor at 500 yards, Morrison said. The Tiger front armor is 100mm thick, and the Tiger 88mm gun can cut through our front armor at 2,000 yards. He paused, letting that settle. You will need to get to point-blank distance, under 300 yards, and even there, you need a perfect hit at the turret ring or the lower hull. Frank ran the math in his mind, the same simple way he used to figure out production numbers back at Detroit Arsenal. The Tiger could destroy them from more than a mile away. They had to get within 3 football fields, and even then, they needed real luck. He remembered the factory floor, seeing Shermans roll out every hour, 5 Shermans for every single German tank, 10 Shermans, 20. The old foreman had said it right. We cannot make them as good as German tanks, son, but we can make 5 for every one of theirs. Quantity over quality. American factories against German engineering. It sounded strong in a big speech. It felt far less strong when you sat inside one of those 5 tanks, knowing you were built to be replaceable. Jamie Walsh lifted his hand. Sarge, what if we don't go straight at it? Morrison's jaw tightened. You follow doctrine. Doctrine says you cover with smoke, advance together in line, and focus fire. Dismissed. The tank commanders walked out into the rain, and nobody said a word. Frank brought his crew close and looked at each of their faces. Jamie holding his Bible under his arm, Rodriguez checking his watch again and again, Chen already running angle numbers inside his head. If we do this by the book, Frank said softly, we are dead. But if we don't follow it, we get court-martialed. He touched the letter in his chest pocket, feeling Rose's handwriting through the fabric. He had promised her he would come home, but the rule book was going to get them all killed. And somewhere in those thick hedgerows, a German tank commander with 47 kills was waiting. July 25th, 08:15 hours. The American line moved through the hedgerows in perfect, neat formation, 5 Shermans, spaced 50 yards apart, exactly like the rule book demanded. Frank's tank, Rawhide 2, rolled in second position in the line. Through the vision slots, Normandy looked like a huge green maze, each hedgerow standing 8 feet high, thick enough to stop a full truck. Sight distance, maybe 50 yards at most. Radio static hissed in Frank's headset as the column leader's voice came through. Rawhide 2, this is Rawhide 1. Keep 50-yard spacing. Over. Frank pressed his mic. Rawhide 1, Rawhide 2, copy. Inside the Sherman, the air smelled of oil, sweat, and the sharp metal smell of ammo. The M4A1 held 89 rounds for the 75mm gun, packed in racks around the turret and hull. The 5-man crew moved with practiced, steady rhythm. Driver and assistant driver in the front hull. Frank up in the commander spot. Jamie at the gunner station, and the loader ready to feed the gun. 30 miles per hour on roads, 15 across open country. 51mm of front armor, 38 on the sides. Numbers Frank had learned by heart in Detroit. Numbers that looked fine on paper, until you learned what they were fine against. The front Sherman, Rawhide 1, turned a sharp corner in the hedge lane at 0822. The sound came first. Crack. Not like big artillery, but sharper, faster, like pure hard German engineering, slicing through the air at 2,657 feet per second. Then the blast. Rawhide 1 simply stopped existing as a real tank. The 88mm round punched through the front plate like it was nothing. The Sherman lit up instantly, fire blasting 30 feet into the air as the ammo inside cooked off. Frank's throat dried up. "Halt! Reverse!" he yelled, But Rawhide 3 was already pushing forward, the commander trying to find the enemy, just like Doctrine ordered. Advance and concentrate fire. Frank never even saw where the Tiger hid. He only saw what it did. Another crack. Another Sherman hit right in the turret at 1,600 yards. The blast tore the whole turret off the ring. 3 crew dead at once. 2 more crawled out, their uniforms burning, their voices screaming in raw fear. "Back! Get us back!" Frank slammed his hand against the driver's shoulder, and the Sherman jerked into reverse, the engine roaring loud as they backed into a deep, sunken lane. Through the narrow vision port, Frank searched for the Tiger, but saw nothing. Only smoke, thick hedges, and the burning bodies of 2 American tanks. Jamie's voice shook hard. "Sarge, I don't see it. Where is it?" "I don't know,"
answered, already dialing in the range and wind. The 88mm KWK-36L56 gun was a true masterpiece. Near 3,000 feet per second muzzle speed, flat path, brutal armor power, time to target here was about 1.8 seconds. The American crews likely never even knew what touched them. Carl pressed the trigger, crack. He watched the tracer line glide out, saw the strike, saw another Sherman burst into fire, another clean kill done with cold skill, just as he learned at Panzer School. "Reload," he ordered his loader. Schmidt was already moving with the smooth, deadly rhythm of German crew drills, but Carl counted in his mind, 2 kills, 4 rounds used, 32 left. Every shell mattered now, with supply lines breaking and Americans pushing deeper into France each day. Schmidt's voice buzzed in the intercom. "Young, eager Herr Oberleutnant, is it true what they say that 1 Tiger equals 10 Shermans?" Carl watched the 3rd burning Sherman through his clear optics. 3 American crews gone in 4 minutes, 15 men who had woken thinking they would live to see tomorrow. He pictured the posters in Germany, the news film showing unstoppable Tigers crushing Allied armor. The speeches about perfect Aryan engineering. "The posters say a Tiger cannot be beaten," Carl answered softly. "The truth is simpler. German engineering with good ground gives advantage, but advantages fade." He tapped the fuel gauge, less than half a tank left. "And Schmidt, they keep coming, they always keep coming." Back in the sunken lane, Frank leaned his back against the turret wall, breathing heavy. His crew stayed silent, Jaime, hands shaking on the gun controls. Through the radio, Frank heard other squads calling for support, reporting hits, begging for permission to fall back. "We cannot fight that," Jaime whispered. Frank took out his map and looked at the shapes of the hedges and the angles in the distance and the ways they could move. And his mind started working on the problem the same way he used to fix trouble in Detroit, because he always believed there had to be an answer, and you only had to change the math. July 26, 0200 hours, Frank could not sleep, so he sat in his tent with a notebook open on his legs, drawing under a small light. And he was not thinking about the normal attack that the rules demanded, but a whole different idea. Because the Tiger was strong from the front, but it did not move, and the Shermans were quick. So he wondered what would happen if 3 tanks came from different sides at the same time. And what if instead of giving the Tiger 1 target after another, they made it pick fast and risky? So he drew lines on the paper and worked out speed and space, because the M4 could hit 30 on the road, and the Tiger turret turned slow, needing 60 seconds for a full spin by hand and about 30 with power. And if 3 Shermans came from different sides at the same second, then the Tiger could not face all of them at once, and it became simple math. The same kind of thing Frank fixed on the factory floor when the lines jammed. And by 0300 he gave up on sleep and walked to the battalion HQ, where Captain Morrison was still awake, looking at lost reports under a lamp that made his face look older. And Frank said, "Sir, I need 5 minutes." And Morrison looked up tired and said, "Sergeant Novak, it is 3 in the morning." And Frank said, "I know, sir, but I think I can end that Tiger." And Morrison pointed at an empty seat, so Frank sat and placed his drawings on the table with paths and time steps and radio notes. And he talked quick about the plan, with 1 Sherman blocking the front with smoke and 2 more coming from different sides to change the shape of the fight and turn the Tiger's strength into a weak point. Because the Tiger's side armor was only 80mm and their 75 could break it at 800 yards. And if they came at the same moment from 3 ways, the Tiger could not swing its huge turret fast enough, and the math would go from 1 Tiger shooting 5 Shermans one by one to 1 Tiger getting boxed in. And Morrison looked at the drawings with a blank face and said, "This is not the normal way, Sergeant. If you break shape, you lose timing, and you might confuse the hedge paths and hit each other. And Frank showed more clear drawings with the road spots and timing steps and radio calls, and said, "Sir, I helped build these in Detroit, and I know what they can do, because the M4 can hit 30 on the road, and we can move way faster than that 56-ton turret can swing. And all we need is speed and angles, and if you are wrong and if one of those Shermans gets lost in the thick brush or the timing is off by 30 seconds, then we are not in a worse place than right now, sir. Because right now the rules say we move in a line and fall in a line, and this way at least we make the tiger pick which way to turn." And Morrison leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes, and Frank could see him thinking through not just the fight, but the danger to his career and the huge weight of command. Because every choice could put more names on the loss list. And after a long moment, Morrison spoke and said, "You get one try, 3 tanks, Rawhide 2, Rawhide 4, Rawhide 5, all moving at the same time at 0600 tomorrow. And if you are wrong, Sergeant, then those 9 men are on you." And Frank found Lieutenant Chen and Staff Sergeant Rodriguez in their tents before sunrise. And Chen was already awake and cleaning his small gun by candlelight. And Rodriguez was writing a letter home, most likely to his wife and his 4 girls in Texas. And Frank put his drawings on the footlocker and showed them the plan, and he said, "We call it the Texas two-step, and Miguel, you go straight at him and throw smoke at 200 yards, and David and I swing around from side paths at full speed, and we hit him from 3 sides within 60 seconds, because he can only look one way at a time." And Chen looked at the drawings and ran his finger along the paths and said the timing has to be perfect, because if one of us gets there fast, the tiger shoots before the others show up. And Frank said that is why we match watches and use radio time calls every 30 seconds, so we stay together. And Rodriguez looked at Frank with the steady calm of a man who lived through 3 landings, and he said, "And if Morrison is right, and we get stuck in the hedge and lose our timing, then we make it up on the move. But Miguel, you have 4 girls waiting for you, and do you really want to drive right at that 88 and hope the normal rules work this time?" And Rodriguez closed his letter and slid it into his pocket, and said, "No, I do not." And they planned for the rest of the night and went over radio lines, timing steps, backup spots, and fields of fire. And Jaime sat still in the corner and drew the plan in the edge of his Bible with 3 small Shermans circling 1 big tank, the strange math that might keep them alive. And 800 meters away, Carl Brandt stood in his turret and watched the dark before dawn with his binoculars. And he had seen something yesterday, that the American scouts were checking 3 side paths instead of 1, and they were learning and changing. And he told Schmidt they are getting smarter, and that makes them more dangerous. But the Tiger was low on gas now, with only 36 gallons left, which was barely enough for 20 miles. And Carl could move once or twice before being stuck, and the strong spot was turning into a trap, and the trap was turning into a cage. July 26, 05:55 hours. Frank stood beside Lucky Strike and watched his crew load the 75mm gun with 89 rounds ready, engine idling. And Jaime was pale but steady, and his hands were not shaking anymore. And Frank hit his radio and said, "Rawhide 2, Rawhide 4, this is Rawhide 5, remember speed and angles, hit him where he is not looking, execute." And at 0600, 3 Shermans rolled down 3 different hedge lanes with engines roaring, and they all closed in on the Tiger's hiding spot like the points of a tightening triangle. And Frank held the turret rail while Lucky Strike jumped over rough farm roads at 28 miles per hour, way faster than the normal rules said for hedge country. And the whole plan lived on speed and timing, because if you get there too early, the Tiger shoots you alone, and if you get there too late, your friend is already burning. And Rodriguez spoke on the radio at 0600, right on time, and he said, "Rawhide 2, Rawhide 4, this is Rawhide 5, starting front run now, throwing smoke." And through his cupola, Frank could not see Rodriguez's tank, but he pictured it rushing forward and firing white smoke rounds at 200 yards. And thick smoke now covered the Tiger and blocked those perfect German eyes that Carl Brandt trusted. And 0602, Carl shouted inside the Tiger because he now understood and said, "They are flanking, driver turn right." But the Tiger was 56 tons, and the soft French dirt was not a flat parade field, and the giant tank turned slow and heavy, with the tracks biting mud and the turret swinging to the new danger. And 0604, Lucky Strike shot through a break in the hedge at 600 yards with the best side shot at the Tiger. And Frank saw it clear for the first time, the sharp armor, the long 88 moving toward them, and the German cross on the turret. And for one bright second, he knew what his factory math had missed, and that this was not just a machine, but 56 tons.
Wanted to strike first. Target Panzer side, 600. Jaime yelled, "Fire!" And the 75 gun kicked back, and the metal block slammed back as the round screamed out, and Frank watched through his sight
as the round hit the Tiger's side, right where the ammo rack sat. Boom. Sparks flew and metal cried, but when the smoke faded, the Tiger still moved and still fought. Because the 80mm side armor held, and Frank yelled, "Reload, reload," and Carl's turret was already turning toward them. That huge 88 was turning toward Lucky Strike like a hungry eye, and Frank knew he had maybe 3 seconds before the shot came, but the sound cracked from the wrong side because Chen's Sherman Rawhide 4 showed up at 500 yards on the far flank just like they planned, and his 75 round slammed into the Tiger at the turret ring, where the armor dropped to 60, and the hit sent sharp metal flying around inside the turret. And Frank saw through his sight that the Tiger's main gun stopped turning in the middle of its swing, jammed, and Carl knew right away what happened because they had changed the geometry on him and turned his strength into a trap. And he could not swing the big gun to hit Frank, and he could not turn the whole tank fast enough to face Chen, and now Rodriguez came pushing through the smoke at 400 yards, a third angle closing in. An abandoned tank, Carl said on the German intercom, like a man who knew the math had flipped against him. And Rodriguez and Chen and Frank blasted the Tiger's back armor, and 3 Shermans fired 9 rounds in 15 seconds, and the German tank could not keep up with all the hits, and 1 round smashed through the engine deck and the fuel lit up, and fire roared from the Tiger, and thick black smoke rolled into the morning sky, and the German crew climbed out with hands raised and clothes covered in oil and smoke, and Carl stepped out last and stood near his burning tank and watched 3 Shermans circle the machine that the posters had called unbeatable, and his hands were up, but his face stayed steady like an engineer looking at a clean answer to a problem he thought had none. And Frank had his driver roll forward with the gun on the German crew, and 50 yards away he could see Carl Brandt clearly, older than he thought, maybe 32, with the look of someone who understood everything that just happened. And 5 years of posters told Carl that 1 Tiger equaled 10 Shermans, but 3 had beaten his machine, not by being stronger, but by being smarter. And Frank was about to tell his crew to get out and take prisoners when the battalion radio came alive, with Captain Morrison calling fast and tight, "All Rawhide units, Tiger attack at Grid Quebec 74, need help now. Rawhide 6 and Rawhide 7 destroyed, many hurt. Rawhide 2, you are closest, do you copy?" And Frank froze with the radio in his hand because another Tiger was 2 miles east, and more Shermans were burning and more crews were dying, and he checked his fuel, half tank left, and his ammo, 71 rounds, and his crew was worn out and still shaking, but American tankers were dying while he stayed still. And he looked at Carl Brandt again, the enemy engineer who built machines of death but now knew the math of defeat. And in that small moment, Frank made a choice that would change everything, and he made it in 3 seconds. And he dropped from the turret and walked to Carl Brandt with his pistol in his hand, but pointed at the ground, and asked in rough German, "Wie viele Tigers? How many Tigers?" And Carl stared at him, really stared, and answered in slow English, "2 more, maybe 3. You cannot fight them alone." And Frank slid his pistol back in its holster, and turned to Rodriguez and said, "Miguel, hold these prisoners with the infantry near you, and David, you are coming with me." Then he looked at Carl again and said, "You are coming too. You are going to show us how to beat them." And Jaime stared with wide eyes and said, "Sarge, we cannot." And Frank said, "We can and we will, because American crews are dying right now, and if he knows Tiger weak spots, we use that knowledge." And Frank pulled zip ties from his kit and said, "Hands out, over Belteuten." And Carl lifted his wrists without fighting, and as Frank tied them, Carl spoke soft and said, "Do you understand what you ask for me to turn against my own tactics?" And Frank said, "I understand. I have maybe 15 minutes before more of my guys burn to death inside machines that cannot save them." And Frank looked into Carl's eyes and said, "You get a choice. You sit here as a prisoner, or you help us fight smart, instead of dumb. Your choice." And Carl looked at his burning Tiger, and at Schmidt and the crew being watched by American soldiers, and at the 3 Shermans that had used a move he never expected. And then he nodded one time and said, "I will help, Not because I betrayed Germany, but because watching brave men die from bad orders, American or German, is not engineering, it is murder. And they drove toward Grid Quebec 74 at 25 miles an hour, with Carl sitting beside Frank in the commander's seat, his hands tied and Jaime keeping his sidearm pointed at him from the gunner place, and Chen's Sherman followed 50 yards behind. And the ride was loud with the engine shaking, the tracks clanking, and the radio full of fast, scared voices from the fight ahead. And Carl leaned toward Frank's map, studying every line, and said, "The Tiger will sit hauled down with its view crossing the lanes, and the side armor is only 80, and you can punch through at 800 yards if you hit clear. And turret turning is our weak point, 30 seconds with power and 60 without." And he tapped a point on the map and said, "If I were leading that Tiger, I would be right here on the high ground with 3 lanes and hedgerow cover." And Frank asked, "Why are you helping us?" without looking up from the map. And Carl stayed quiet a moment, watching the Norman fields slide by through the vision slot. And he said, "Because this." And he pointed at the burning land and the ruined tanks and the smoke that curled up from many fires. "This is not why I studied engineering. I wanted to build bridges and cranes and things that lift people and help cities. And instead, I built this. And your orders sending brave men straight into 88 guns because a manual says so is also a kind of engineering failure, just like any broken machine." And on 07:15, they reached the place where the fight had happened, and Rawhide 6 was a burned wreck in the field, with the turret blown away. And Rawhide 7 was hurt but still moving, and it was pulling back from an enemy they could not see. And Frank grabbed the radio and said, "Rawhide 7, this is Rawhide 2. Do Texas two-step. I will hold his front with smoke, and you come in from the east side road. How copy?" And the answer came back, shaky but still ready. And they said, "Rawhide 2, this is Rawhide 7. We copy Texas two-step, and we are ready." And Carl gave them ranges and angles as they moved forward, and his voice stayed calm like he was teaching students instead of helping destroy machines made by his own people. And he said, 1,200 meters, load smoke when you fire. He will turn toward the threat, and that gives your flanker about 45 seconds before the turret can point at the new angle. And Frank ordered smoke rounds, and the white phosphorus opened wide over the Tiger spot and blocked its sight just like it did to Carl's tank earlier. And then Frank pushed Lucky Strike forward hard, so the Tiger would look at him while Chen and Rawhide 7 ran fast on 2 side paths at top speed. And the plan worked perfect, and Frank held the front, and Rawhide 7 came from the east at about 30 miles an hour and hit the back armor of the Tiger at 550 yards and fired 3 fast shots for an engine kill. And the German crew jumped out at once with hands up because they knew they lost the fight just like Carl had. And the MPs came to take the second Tiger crew. A new tank moved into the open, and it had a different shape and a longer gun, and it was a Sherman Firefly from the British 7th Armored Division. And the commander, Lieutenant Powell, got out and looked around with a big grin and said, "That was a bloody brilliant flank, Yank." And Powell touched the Firefly 17-pounder gun and said, "Next week, you won't need fancy moves, because this gun can break a Tiger from the front at 1,000 yards with 1 clean shot, and we're making a lot of them now." And Frank looked at the long 17-pounder and then looked at Carl. And Carl nodded slow because he understood right away. So the trick becomes standard, and that is how wars are truly won, because good ideas slowly turn into doctrine that everyone follows. And as the MPs took Carl away, the German officer turned his head back and said, "Sergeant Novak, your factory, you said Detroit," and Frank answered yes, and Carl said, "My factory was Henschel in Kassel, and we both made machines for war," and maybe after this, he did not finish the line, but Frank understood what he meant. And Frank reached out his hand and they shook for a short moment, like formal engineers who had spent the whole morning changing the math of staying alive. And Jaime watched with his Bible under his arm, and he understood that sometimes dignity mattered more than loud propaganda, even when you lose. and 3 months after the fight, Frank's Texas two-step flank move became part of the official United States Armored Doctrine, and Sherman Firefly production reached 600 units by September. And Tigers were not magic monsters anymore. They were only targets with weak points that soldiers now knew. And in November, Frank got a letter from the Red Cross saying that Carl Brandt was alive in a POW camp in England, and he was teaching Allied officers about German tank designs, and he even sent a drawing of 2 engineers building something different, like a bridge or a crane or anything that was not meant for killing. And Frank sat in his tent that
night writing to Rose, saying, "Today I learned something that propaganda never taught, and wars are not won by the best machines, but by the best thinking, and sometimes enemies can teach you how to win." And he looked at the sketch in Jaime's Bible, showing 3 Shermans surrounding 1 tiger, the strange, impossible shape that changed everything. And for the first time, he felt like the math finally made sense.